are now entering the Pain Pod, sponsored by the Chronic Pain Association of Canada. Are you ready to know what you don't know about chronic pain? We're shining a light on the good, the bad, and the very ugly about living with pain in Canada. No hype, no hysteria, just the truth. And now, here's your host, Anne-Marie Gatto.
Good afternoon, Pain Podders. The Pain Pod talks sex and chronic pain, Part 1, sponsored by Canada's only national not-for-profit for people living in pain, the Chronic Pain Association of Canada. Are you back pained and want to have a sex life without hurting your back? Well, listen up. I found out that the clinical community was in contact regularly with Canadian Dr. Stuart McGill, Chief Scientific Officer for BackFit Pro and a distinguished professor emeritus at Waterloo University in Ontario. Professor McGill was and is still asked by clinicians about couples who are celibate because of back pain. Are there any guidelines on sexual techniques that can reduce the risk of more pain? So the challenge was on, and Professor McGill and graduate student conducted the only study in the world that took real couples and measured their spine postures and muscle activity while engaged in various sexual positions. The study measured muscle activity and 3D spine and body movements using the very same technology that was used in the making of Avatar. So the object was to create an atlas of sexual positions that did not trigger back pain. Welcome to you, Professor McGill.
Thanks very much, Anne-Marie. Good to see you again.
Yes.
In the Pain Pod.
I find this whole research fascinating, and I can't wait to hear more. So let me ask you, who is this clinical community around your particular work, and just what were they asking?
Right. Well, I suppose we could subcategorize them into two. The first would be family docs, the frontline clinicians, chiropractors, physical therapists, and then on the counseling side, psychotherapists, etc., like yourself. Having been a professor and published a fair amount of work over the years on how the back worked, I guess I was seen as someone who could answer their questions. As you've already said in the introduction, they would have couples come and ask them, we hurt our backs last time we had sex. We're now celibate. What guidelines are there? And do you have any advice for us? And the guidelines and any substantial study just is absent. So being the professor that I was, they would contact me and ask, what advice can you offer us? And I said, I don't know. However, I know the experiment that would need to be done. It's a very difficult experiment, as you can imagine. But towards the end of my career, one of my graduate students, Natalie Sidorkowitz, and I decided we were going to do this and try and help give this guidance. But the second clinical community was my own. I see back pain patients, and these aren't just people with back pain. No one calls me out of the blue and says, oh, could you see me for my back? It's all referrals. So if a clinician is having a real challenge with a back pained person, or a couple in this case, and they're failing, those are the type of referrals that I get. The couples would come, and again, they just had no idea on what activities, not only sex, it might be riding a bike, riding in a car, laying in a bed in a certain position. Some people report sitting at the computer causes my back pain, but going for a walk takes it away. The next person comes in and says, going for a walk and standing causes my back pain, and sitting is the relief. So the challenge was to get past this idea of non-specific pain, test the person. If I can't test them, or one of our clinicians can't, then we gave them a guideline on self-tests to try and understand their pain triggers. And as you've pointed out, the goal was, could we create an atlas? Here is your back pain trigger. These are positions and motions that should not trigger that specific pain, and these are ones that will and you should avoid. So that was the two clinical communities, I suppose.
Okay. So, yeah, you said complicated. What was it that you required first? Was it recruitment for the study or the technology or maybe something else entirely?
Yeah. We'd spent years developing the laboratories at the university. One was a laboratory where we measured spine loads in real people doing things. The other laboratory was where we would take cadaveric spines, expose them to certain loads and motions and that mechanical insults, shall we say, and we saw what injuries occurred. So we could link the injuries back to specific exposures in real life. So using all of that, plus the experimental clinic that we had at the same time, we'd already developed the technology. So really, we had to think this through now. Going to the ethics committee, you can imagine they said, well, do we really need to do this? Couldn't we just simulate sex with people with their clothes on, make the measurements, and we wouldn't have to, go through any possible risks associated with actually doing the study. So our first sub-experiment is simulated sex the same as real sex in terms of mechanical pain triggers? The answer to that was no, it's actually quite different. And if we're going to get a valid insight into this, we've got to do the real thing. So that was the first question. And we also got an idea of what we were to expect in terms of range of motion, muscle activity levels, because you can imagine we had to build a Velcro harness system to hold the instrumentation on. It's not very sexy, I suppose, being surrounded with these instruments. I do have a funny story that the listeners will find fun. So there was a bed in the laboratory. The cameras view infrared light. So in the making of Avatar, some people may have seen the trailer. The actual actors had little LEDs all over their face. So when they smiled, the LEDs would move and they would drive the computerized avatars. So we did the same thing. We would hear them moving and we would watch their avatars on the screen, but we were behind a curtain, so to speak, off in the corner of the room, looking at all our instrumentation and watching the avatars move on the screen. And then all of a sudden, in the first couple, the avatars stopped and the couple started to giggle. And we said, called out through the curtain, it was like a Wizard of Oz thing. Is everything going okay? What's going on? And they said, we're Velcroed together. We had to go back to square one and redesign our instrumentation Velcro suit for sex because, as you can imagine, it had never been done before. But these are some of the fun stories when you're pioneering an original study like this.
Yeah. So how did you get an ethics pass in order to do this kind of work? Because nobody did it before, and I understand no one has done it since.
Right. Well, Natalie did the initial work with the ethics committee, and really there's three parties of concern here. Number one, there are the participants to protect their concerns. Number two are the scientists protecting their concerns. And number three is the university. I can tell you flat out that there wouldn't be a university in the United States who would do this activity. We were originally going to partner with the, what's the Institute for Sex Research?
McKinsey?
McKinsey. yeah, so we contacted the Kinsey and we were going to partner with them. Do you know, we couldn't find a US university that would even go near this because they were so afraid of the public backlash that would occur. And yet the Kinsey claims to be the big institute and
Yes.
repository for sex science. So we were on our own. However, the chief medical officer of the university came and spoke to the ethics committee saying, yes, this research, it's really needed. We don't have the guidelines, and the University of Waterloo is solid enough and recognizing what real problems are, and we're going to be bold enough to address this, but of course mitigate as much risk as possible with the ethics process. Even the president of the university gave his blessing and said, "Yes, this is real research, and we're going to proceed." Not little things, perhaps major things. We weren't allowed to recruit any people who were members of the university. You know, professors would joke and say, "Oh, if you need a subject, give me a call." And I thought, well,
Oh,
or you could imagine a graduate student fearful that they might be asked to do this, or maybe they weren't fearful, maybe they
right.
wanted to. I don't know. But we agreed with the ethics committee. The way to proceed was to not have anyone associated with the university. So now you can imagine the recruitment was quite a challenge. But anyway, we developed our protocol, and we had the couple who had come to the laboratory. And first of all, they were briefed on what was going to go on. They were shown everything. They had to fill out psychosocial questionnaires, family stability. Were they in a committed relationship for 2 years? I mean, it was a hell of a screening process to make sure we had very solid citizens, so to speak. And let's see, what else did we
Well, how
do?
did you look for
Oh,
these people? Like, how do you put it out there that you're looking for recruitment for this kind of
yeah,
study?
yeah. It wasn't on the CBC News, I can tell you that. Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So I went to many of my medical colleagues who have asked me in the past, and a few of them said, yes, we have one or two couples at the moment who I could suggest. But, they might not pass the
Sure.
psychological stability questionnaire that I just mentioned a few moments ago, or we might really risk triggering their pain and setting them back for 6 months. But we found a few. But you know where the majority came from? Natalie was very keen on Latin dance, and she went
Oh,
to
love
Latin
it.
dance school. And isn't that interesting that
Yeah.
the psychological milieu around the type of person who wants to attend Latin dance school is also the kind of person who would be interested in a very scientific way, trying to understand movement in this way. And I believe the majority of our couples came through that process. So that's an interesting story.
That is interesting. Yeah, Latin dance is so sexy and sensual, and then they want to know what's going on too. How good is that? So, how did you come to use the same technology as the people who made the movie Avatar? Was
Right.
it because it was available, or
Yes, but it was available for a reason. We'd already developed it in the laboratory. I mean, this is the University of Waterloo that has very developed technological capabilities. It always has been a technology leadership institution. And we'd already developed the technology that would follow the three-dimensional motion of a person doing anything, and we used what was called electromyography. Uh, uh, when you want to move, your brain thinks of the movement, converts that movement into a pulse train that goes down the nerves in a very precise way. and those pulse trains fire off the muscles to create sequenced and controlled movement. So we'd already developed the technology that would measure that. And putting it together, you can imagine that loads inside your body are a function of posture. So if I was to flex forward, I would stretch the posterior tissues in my back and stretch the nerves like the sciatic nerve and things like that. If there's a disc bulge, it would stress the back of the disc. But if I moved into another position, the stress migrates. So it was very important to have quite precise measures of subtle postural changes and muscle activity and whatnot, because that told us the stresses on the tissues. We'd done enough work for the previous 30 years to know that the pain concentration is where the stress concentration is, the mechanical stress. And over time, that mechanical stress sensitizes tissues and becomes the pain source. So that was the link, I suppose, on linking all of this technology together.
Right. So if Waterloo developed the technology, is that where the movie makers got it from? Would you know?
No, because Avatar was only following movement and driving these. Basically, they were stick figures, and then they get rendered and fleshed out with the blue characters that were in the movie. They don't care about loads and figuring out muscle activation levels. So we were far beyond that, actually.
Okay.
And that was what we had developed and put together. The actual visual part was a commercial hardware system that had already been developed. So we took that and then added on this capability to measure stress distributions in the body.
Right. Okay. So I understand that after all of this, you were able to suggest a sexual position where both partners, that's really impressive. Both partners could spare their spines. So is there a name to this, or can you describe it, and what makes this sort of spine sparing, if I can say that, for both?
Right. I've already introduced this idea. People have been told, oh, well, you've got non-specific back pain. Our collective work over the years has shown that's a real cop-out.
Yeah.
All back pain is highly specific, but it takes a certain kind of assessment to reveal the specific pain triggers in the individual. So it's not us telling you or anyone consuming this study and information, here's the best position for sex. It doesn't exist. But given your specific pain trigger, here is a position that we know will not trigger your pain, and here's a position and emotion that most assuredly will. So you have to have an assessment and an understanding of your pain triggers to start this. That's at the personal level. When you measure couples and mention that, I can give a few more generic guidelines. So whoever the person is on the bottom, I mean, this is kind of fun stuff, Anne Marie. I mean, I didn't know what cowgirl was before.
Oh. You never watched Sex in the City.
Yeah, well, apparently. And I didn't know what spooning was, or I was well schooled doing this study. So it was kind of fun because there was a guideline, and it was only an opinion from a surgeon, I believe in New York City, who was saying, if you have back pain, having sex, spooning is the recommended way. Well, wait a second. If you have a person and you ask them to sit in a chair and they slouch like this and they say, that causes my back pain, most in a guaranteed way, spooning is going to trigger that because that's what it is laying on the side. Mm-hmm. So, as I said, we have to get to the level of understanding the individual's pain triggers. But now I'm going to get into some generic principles So the person on the top is responsible for the motion. The person on the bottom is responsible for getting comfortable. So say it could be the female on the bottom or the male, as I learned all of these sorts of things. Say the person on the bottom had back pain triggered by flexing their spine and really pushing it into the bed, if that's where they were.
Yeah.
If we positioned a folded towel under the low back, as an example, that would buttress and support their back in a supported position, and it didn't trigger pain. So there would be an example. But if the person on top was motion intolerant, they shouldn't be on the top. They should be the person buttressed and supported on the bottom. Whereas the person on the top who is motion tolerant, then they should be on top. But say you get a person who knows the difference, and it's kind of fun to demonstrate these things, I think. But doing a pelvic tilt, you can see what I mean. There's a flexion motion to the back. There's an extension. Some people are triggered by that. But if they were to find the position of no pain and then use the hips to extend and flex the hips, now you're starting to see how with subtle coaching, you can migrate the stress and the movement away from the pain, painful spine and towards the very athletic hips that aren't generating pain. Or the next person might be hip replaced. Now we have to go the other way. So, and then we never mentioned, because I'm a spine person, people ask about back pain. But, say you have a knee replacement, what do you do? So on the side, I've also created some knee and hip atlases as well, but we haven't published those. But anyway, that gives a little bit of an idea now on how we converged on generics, bottom and top, and it may not even be bottom top. It might be one like, if I may use the term doggy style as an example. And the person in the quadruped position, you can imagine they can control the posture of their spine very easily and move their spine away from the position that is triggering them. So that might be a recommended position for one person, but probably not for someone with a knee replacement.
Right. So I'm interested now, this motion tolerant and motion intolerant. What if the two people are the same? How does that work? Can it?
Well, of course it can if they're both spine motion intolerant. In other words, doing a hula hoop exercise or a pelvic tilt triggers both of them, then they are going to have to be hip centric and move the hips. So the person on the bottom would buttress their low spine, their low back with an appropriate folded towel or a pillow or something like that. And, that it might be that the person is standing who is on top.
Right.
And
if you just have to be the right height. Right? Like logistically, if your partner is lying on the bed and you're standing, you just have to be the right height, right? Because you don't want to be bending.
Exactly. Yeah. Or you can be creative. I mean, here I am in the clinic with a patient table, and I just step on a foot pedal and the table rises or it decreases.
Right. So you'd have to make it so that you're the right height.
Well,
and
sure.
So you're not,
Yeah. So it might be on another surface, shall we say, where it allows a person to stand or kneel or whatever the appropriate, shall we say, I was going to use the term bulletproof. But that's really what we're trying to achieve here, to show people how to be resilient and find that resilience through technique for themselves.
And not lose big chunks of your life, which pained people often do, and then suffering really soars.
Well,
it's so important.
Well, it is. Going back to that ethics process, there are people on the ethics committee that really need a justification for doing this. And when you look at the World Health Organization, metrics for worldwide health, one of them is the ability to have sex.
Mm-hmm.
That is a metric for good health from both a physical and a mental point of view.
Absolutely.
So, these are, over the years, I've had people smile and laugh at these kinds of things, or, sometimes they make fun of it as well. And it shows me that they haven't been with people who really suffered because of this. That, they
Absolutely.
lost substantial components out of their life.
And I mean, we've always needed four things to survive. We've always needed water and food and shelter and sex to procreate. But guess what? The good thing now is people can have sex just to be intimate, just to have fun. And why, like losing that can be a big chunk in someone's relationship. And I've seen a lot of times, very cruelly, people be left because they're not able to have sex in a way that they're really not really compromised in pain. So
Well,
all of this is so important.
I'm with you, obviously, and I wish some of the naysayers or people who don't seem to be able to handle this kind of work could hear what you just said. They
Right.
have
Anyone. Yeah. Ask me. I can tell you all kinds of examples. So, and I mean, we know there seems to be unlimited information out there on what happens, like, say, to your pelvic muscles when you have an orgasm or something. Why should we not know about other muscles? Why does it have to just be contained to one little section of the body? I don't really understand that. Or how that came about. But I think that, like, I'm also interviewing someone who's doing research on chronic pain and dating and intimacy, etc. And she said she's looked and there's basically nothing out there for people in pain. There's no research. There's nothing. She couldn't find anything.
well,
That's sad.
we have a few papers anyway on this
Yeah.
particular study, but now that you mentioned the pelvic floor and whatnot, we couldn't help, and it's only my nature. When we do a study, I try and collect as much information as we possibly can, not even knowing what we're going to discover. But it's a voyage. It's
Yeah.
going out there and seeing what we find. And one of them happened to involve male orgasm, which, as far as we understand, people have never measured from a physiologic and biomechanical point of view before. Do you want me to mention a few of our
Oh
findings?
yes, please. Yes.
Okay. Uh, Obviously, as a male researcher, I have experienced subject N of one
Mm.
myself.
Yeah.
And I didn't understand the variance of the orgasm. Now, what I mean by that is we measured a few of the men who were extremely violent in the magnitude of muscle contraction, the pelvic floor, the abdominal wall, the gluteal muscles. They went to 100% of contraction. So could you imagine
Wow.
contracting to 100%? And now couple that with, put your spine or your pelvis or your shoulder out of position. Put it in an awkward position. Now activate the muscles 100%. And you'll realize very quickly what a potent pain trigger that is. So there are some men who go to full spinal deviation and 100% muscle contraction at the same time. No wonder they have disabling pain. The next male we would measure, and Anne-Marie, it's almost a non-event. It
Ah.
just kind of blows by, and forgive me for this, but we're watching the thrusting cycles and whatnot, and it hardly even changes. It's almost undetectable from a scientific point of view. So there's the spectrum of response that I spoke to my colleagues at the Kinsey Institute, and even they were somewhat surprised at the spectrum of this response. And the Kinsey Institute.
I know, and you're telling that. Oh my goodness. So, so for the fellas that are having the spinal deviation, like you said, in the 100% contraction, which sounds like excruciating pain, is there anything that can be done for that to help that, or is that just nature?
No, I don't think. Well, I let me put it this way: good coaching can change painful movement behavior into painless.
Okay.
And that's universal. Doesn't matter what the activity is. It requires hacking the movement and understanding it. But the first thing is it comes from awareness. So think of a good coach. A good coach showing a person how to move might get the person to move and do subtle corrections. Some people respond to verbal cues. Keep your head up. Oh, that took my pain away. That's all the coaching cues that person needed. The next person might say, I'm going to now give you a spacer under your chin. Now keep your head up. Oh, yeah, that takes my pain away. Okay, I'm going to have to do this on myself repeatedly until it becomes an automatic default pattern. And then the next person, you might say, reach your chin to the stars. So that, that's an internal cue. Touching them is an external cue. Giving them a verbal correction is a verbal cue. Sometimes we might use an auditory cue. Every time you hear that, a sprinter, here's a gun and go. So that would be the extreme example. But good coaching knows how to use the cues that an individual responds to. So that's the first thing. The person becomes aware of their trigger, and they are cued appropriately to achieve the behavior change. Now it's a matter of being aware and repeating that painless movement behavior.
Until you've got it down.
Until you've got it down.
Okay.
So now you have an excuse with your partner. We have to practice until I get the painless.
Yeah.
In neurology, by the way, it's called an engram. So we move naturally, you used that word, which are natural engrams that people run. Think of them like a movement tape, a computer algorithm, shall we say. Sometimes those get corrupted. And interestingly enough, pain does corrupt some of those patterns. And sometimes those patterns need to be reset to a painless default pattern. So again, it depends on the mechanism here, but those are some of the thoughts for, I know your audience is a group that's very interested in this.
Yes, but, absolutely.
Replace some of the corrupted movement patterns with healthy default patterns and enjoy moving pain-free.
Yeah. Okay. So do you have any, or do you know if there's any future research coming from this study or another like it?
I am not aware of another one like it. We published the first round of the Atlas just in my book, Back Mechanic, which you're familiar with.
I'll give a shout out to that in a minute.
Yeah, which is a self-help guide for people with back pain in everything, not just sex, obviously. But we're expanding the Atlas currently now. You can imagine we have to get artists to draw all these different figures, etc. And that will be published in a most likely a family medicine journal to get out to the front line people.
Okay. And maybe you can let me know when it is published so I can let other people know it's out there as well.
I'll do that. Actually, there was, you've heard of The Economist? the magazine, The Economist. It's
Yeah.
a pretty solid conservative journal about world economics and money.
Yeah.
They wrote an article on our work, and on the front page it said, broke back mounting, sex and backache.
Oh my goodness, that's kind of clever.
I thought that was pretty good.
It is.
For the
It is.
economy.
I'm surprised they wrote that in The Economist of all publications. That's really funny.
We
They-
have a publicity department at the university that tracks various research and public affairs announcements and those kinds of things. We made either the front or second page of newspapers around the world, China, Italy, Korea. Anyway,
I love it.
according to the university, we touched a readership, I believe it was 3.6 billion people.
Oh, I love it. It's so necessary to have these conversations and to gain, important and back saving knowledge like you're providing us with. So for our listeners, I wanted to tell you that Professor McGill, like he said, has a short version of a sexual atlas in his book, Back Mechanic, which includes spine-sparing positions that enable sex for people with back problems, as well as lots of other activities in your life, too. It's a great book. Everyone should have a copy. So the book guides the reader through a self-assessment of their pain triggers, and then based on the specific trigger, positions and movements are shown to consider and to avoid. So I think this is also very necessary and long overdue, and I'm so happy to hear about it. I truly commend you for taking this on, and I hope this encourages more study in your field, and also for any other chronic pain condition where sexual activity can cause flares. So thank you again for spending your time with us. We always love to have you.
Yeah, Anne-Marie, thanks for all you do. I know a lot of people look to your leadership, so keep it up.
All right. Take care. We'll see you again.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning in to the Pain Pod. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe so you never miss a future show. Share this with your friends, and if you're so inclined, give us that 5-star review and comment. We hope these podcasts motivate you to get involved with us at chronicpaincanada.com. Until next time.